All right, welcome back to yet another episode of the Blasters and Blades podcast. We have on deck the fabulous Mr. Nicholas Garber. Nick Garber, he's actually still alive. Stabby has not killed him, so I consider today a success, sir.
Yeah, I do too. I just give her wine and chocolate and cuddles, and that kind of staves off the me getting stabbed.
So you just stave off her homicidal tendencies with chocolate? Okay, I'm taking notes here.
No, all three things. Gotta give her wine, chocolate, cuddles. Tell her she's pretty. Typical guy stuff. Give them what they want.
I'm just saying, you never tell me I'm pretty, Nick.
It's because you're never on camera. I barely know what you look like anymore.
All right. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans. It's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just three nerdy veterans geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. The podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. So without further ado, we're going to jump right in. But first, so what have you been up to since the last time we chatted? And I noticed, because we talked about it in the pre-show, you're wearing the same shirt as you did a couple weeks ago. Do you own any others?
I do. I have a lot of shirts. But I'll come across like 4 or 5 that end up in like a rotation for a while, just because I like the way it feels. It's like the shirt material.
Okay.
I got a
so what have you been up to?
One that I'm really excited about wearing on air. But
nice. What are you up to?
Working on comics. Doing more strips for the A Kid and His Comic newspaper that comes out every month. It's also in Barnes and Noble. So if you're in Barnes and Noble, go check that out. Working on stuff for Apogee, doing pinups, doing commissions, doing a lot of fun drawings. I mean, they're all fun, but some of them I get paid for, and some of them I just do them because, like today, I was like, I'm gonna draw the Hulk today. I haven't drawn the Hulk in forever, and this is the first time that I've actually gotten the Hulk, what I consider like correct. Like I got the features right. Usually when I draw the Hulk, it's like a normal dude that I just kind of inflated, like put a hose in him and start pumping him up. So I got the nuances of, the tiny ears, the huge jaw, the hairline that just kind of looks like he's wearing a toupee almost, and then I did some coloring. So mostly artwork, protecting the border and, dealing with that by making awesome art and then doing these podcasts with y'all.
Okay, and so I am still working on the series that Cursed Brigade with James M. Ward of the legendary TSR and gaming fame. We talked about all of that last time. He's been a guest on the show, so I won't belabor the point, but we got several of the beta readers back for book 1, so we turned that into the publisher in the last time. Still working on book 2. We don't have an exact word count because I think we talked about this off air, but James Ward is well, let's just say the man does not like change, and he still uses Word 97. So everything I send him has to be converted backwards for him to do his part of the edits. Then he sends it back, and then I have to convert it forward, and then I have to reformat it, and then I can edit. So what I end up with is the book is in like 20 documents of like a few chapters at a time, chunks.
It's like taking 8-track, moving to cassette, moving it to
CD, right
now to Blu-ray, and then MP4. It's just like.
It is. Man. I mean, I think he's worth it. His stories are good, but so we're working on that. So I'm not exactly sure the exact word count. I really do need to combine everything and see where we're at. But we're making progress with book 2. We've got plans for book 3 and 4 of the series, which is the Egyptian arc. It's still up in the air where we go from Egypt. He wants to go to Greece. I've started thinking about like the Alexander the Great route could be fun. Going to China. Some of their pantheon is pretty interesting. Hit through India on the way. Although I guess if you're coming from Egypt, you could do that through Greece and Italy.
Oh, absolutely.
Maybe be a little circuitous, but it could be done.
Yeah, you could totally do that.
But so we're working on that. Still waiting on some art from you, but you've got it on your docket, on your dance card, as it were. So that's good for the side project with the art. So I'm kind of excited about that. Have been editing because Bayonet Books is going to publish a collection of short stories from James Ward. And when I first started working with him, he wrote very textbook style because that's what game manuals are. If you think about like a D&D manual any of them, they read like an academic textbook.
Exactly.
And
I was looking for the words.
I
You
think
found them.
that's I think that's by design, so that way you don't you give the framework, but let the players sort of build the world, right? Like
Right.
you give the setting, and they they add the walls, so to speak. And so I actually expected to have to do a lot more, but he's learned, because instead of just rewriting it for him like in the past they probably did for the fiction, I'm like, this is what we're going to do and this is why. And he's like, oh cool, why did no one tell me this? And so he's been giving me phenomenal stuff. So he went back through some of his old short stories and he redid them, and now we've got those getting ready to publish for him. Mostly we're doing it as a favor. I'm not in the business really of publishing anyone else except for the anthologies. But
Right.
again, he's using Word 97, so he's not messing with Vellum or any of the other PDF formatters to make a book. And
I'm
so
surprised he's
we're
not
putting that
writing it
together
on
for him.
papyrus, you know, with like
Don't give him ideas. He just
with
might. But I
a
can't hate
feather
the man,
and
because
ink and as a quill.
he mailed me a Kopesh for Christmas.
Mm.
So I mean, you can't hate a guy that gives you stabbies, right?
No, I can't. Sounds awesome.
I mean, that's a sign of love right there.
It
And
is.
he
Better
mailed
than a hug.
me a copy of his Castles and Crusaders Egyptian Codex. I
Nice.
thought he was giving me like the gods and demigods, like, because he said it's a first print. I'm thinking I'm getting one of the originals. And I remember telling Walt, he's like, dude, is that an original? I'm like, I don't know. That's what he said. He goes, I'll give you money for it. I bet we could sell it on eBay. And I told James that. He goes, I don't like either of you that much. If I had one of the originals of the
Oh
gods
yeah.
and demigods, I'd be selling it. I'm like, oh.
Or
He's like, but
yeah,
CNC Castles and Crusaders is awesome too. I'm like, oh,
yeah,
okay. But the references have been fun to go through. So why reinvent the wheel if he's done all the work?
yeah. Absolutely.
And I'll put a link to it if you're interested, dear listener. Castles and Crusaders is put out by Troll Lord Games, and I mean, if you're doing a gaming company, that's kind of a cool name. Like I
Yeah.
can't hate on that.
Oh no,
Um,
they nailed it on that one.
yeah, I mean, like I said, but I'll throw the links to TLC, Troll Lord Games and Castles and Crusaders, so you can look into it. Although periodically they're on Humble Bundle, where you can buy a bunch of the PDFs for good price.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I've been working on. And of course, now that we've got that out of the way, we didn't spend 30 minutes telling army stories this time. So I mean, I
I
guess
think
that's
we got it
progress
kind of out of our system last time.
for
Kind of.
another year or two, or
Yeah.
a can of Yingling or something. I don't know. We're sober,
Casey.
so
Casey. Well,
case
you're sober. I'm. I
ish,
had.
sober ish.
Yeah, I still have my wits about me. I thought today was a good day to have an old fashioned, and so I've made two now. And but I'm getting ready to eat soon. After this, I'll go eat, and that'll
So
sober me right
is
up.
the old fashioned in honor of James Ward, who uses the old fashioned windows and the old fashioned word perfect?
Sure, why not? I just
There
like
you go,
old fashioned.
James. This drink's for you, James Ward. But yeah, so that's what we've been up to. Before we get started on the topic today, which if you're listening to this, you probably saw the title and it's going to be about heroic last stands in sci-fi and fantasy. But if there are any topics you want us to host, you're like, hey, I'd really like a panel about this. Like, let us know in the Facebook group, message us through the email, like all the contacts we give at the end of the episode. Reach out. We take suggestions. We're all for it. We are talked. The host Nick Cisca and I have talked, and we want to start doing more than just interviews, because we want to be more than just a platform where other people come to talk about
We
themselves.
do love talking to authors, though, but we're trying to
Oh,
diversify
absolutely.
the content a
We
little
we
bit.
just we want to have some fun with us. Like I have more fun when it's just us BSing. And Sasko's like, why don't we record this crap? And
Right.
so that's what we started doing. Some of that was just us. So let us know what you think. If there are topics you want, if there are guests you want, like I'm still open to it. I do try to balance the established authors with the noobs, because we were all new once and someone gave us a chance. So we try to return the favor.
And if you guys want to talk more about comic books, I mean, that's the reason they brought me on the darn show. So
Absolutely. I don't know enough to
give me
know
more
what I
comic book
don't
stuff.
know. But we've talked about Nick and I. We've got to probably do it over the summer, because we need some lag time or leeway to organize it. But he's going to reach out to some indie comic creators, and we're going to look at doing maybe a indie comic day, like make it a thing, and then invite some of them on if there isn't
First
one
Saturday.
already.
Funny you should mention the first Sunday or Saturday in August is Indie Super Sunday or Saturday or something like that. It's the indie comic version of Free Comic Book Day, or those of us that can afford to put out free comic books. That's kind of our jam. So yeah, it's in August. I'll confirm and let you guys know. But that would be a perfect day to do that, or at least release the episode.
Yeah, so we're working on that because like one of the things we did when bringing Nick on was because we wanted to diversify more than just the sci-fi and the fantasy books. Like we've interviewed when we were Sci-Fi Shenanigans, we interviewed one actor that was in sci-fi film. While we don't want to make digital media the focus, we're not opposed to finding some of them if we can get some that would come on the show. I just don't have the time and the patience to cut through all the slack of PR flax and whatnot. So we haven't pursued it, but we're looking at that too. Nick knows some people though, so we're going to see what we can do.
If they would just answer back, it'd be so much easier. But I understand everyone's busy. We're all working on stuff. That's how we pay the bills.
So I do have a question for you before we dive into Last Stands. You mentioned you drew the Hulk today.
I did.
Which Hulk did you do? The one from the 80s show? The one from the modern Marvel interpretation?
Well, it's kind of weird. I did a little Eric Larson and a little bit of Todd McFarlane Hulk with a dash of Jim Lee. And I'm just name dropping like crazy. But if you see it, I can bring it up if you'd like. Let's bring it up here. Hulk. And then we'll just let our dear viewers take a quick look at it. Hold on. Should have had it prepped anyway. I know better. Nick, you know better. All right. So I got that up, and you can take a look at what Hulk that was. It's got a little bit of me.
Bless you.
My Lord, I don't know what that was. A demon, maybe? Exorcise the demon? But anyway, it's got a little bit of me in there. I really wanted to do I haven't drawn the Hulk in forever. So I wanted to give him another crack. And I also wanted to kind of try my coloring skills a little bit and practice on those because I like being a well-rounded artist. I mean, I can do pencils. I can do pencils and inks. I really want to start doing coloring, not because I'm going to try and push my colorist out of the jobs at Apogee, but just because that's a skill set I wanted to develop also. Because I think even though I'm still learning the pencil and ink and all that stuff, constantly growing as an artist, this is the thing that I'm most, I don't know. I'm not confident in my coloring skills. So it's something I kind of want to work on and get better at, just in case, just in case. Okay. There's a little bit of me and a couple other artists that have inspired me throughout my life going on. The big thing was I used to give him a regular nose. And so I shortened the nose and made it kind of like made it a little more, I guess, caveman-ish, So he's got the short nose, he's got the large bridge, and the small ears, because that's what I loved about like classic Hulk is that like he was so disproportionate. Like he'd have this giant jaw and a huge forehead, his tiny nose and small ears, and his hairline wouldn't go all the way down, like a normal person's. It's kind of like it was almost like a high fade, a high and dumb,
Yeah.
So
okay. It looks good though. Is the hair purplish or is that just me being colorblind?
That's you colorblind. It's more of a blue. I mean, his hair is black, because Banner's hair is black. But old comic book trick, can't make it just jet black. You got to put some of those highlights in there. And usually the color they chose was blue. So, like for the longest time before I knew about that, I thought Superman's hair was blue.
Okay,
that's how they did it. So, but alrighty.
Whatever works. So we have, I guess, beating around the bush too much. The last thing we were going to do is last time we were talking about the things you were going to show your art sample. If you could do that, and then we'll get started because it was really good, and I thought it'd be kind of cool to share that.
Let me share this real quick and. Window. All right,
just because I think it's cool. I like all the pretty pictures.
The pretty pictures. So when we were talking about the the maturity level has increased in comics as far as like not only in print but in the TV media, other media representations. You know, so this is a page that I did for the Crimson Guardians issue 1. It's page 9, I believe, and we're doing a little backstory on a character called Reckoning. Is it Reckoning? Yeah, Reckoning. He was a SF baddie, you know, doing bad things to bad people for God and country. You know, so I really wanted to kind of stretch my wings on like poses and weapon systems and violence and things like that. So I think this page best illustrates what I wanted to achieve. So he's like running through the courtyard, just smoking dudes with his M4, you know.
Okay. All right. And so the topic that Nick wanted to talk about today, and I'm going to pull up some art that is germane. We actually did an anthology about heroic last stands, we being Bayonet Books. And my claim to fame is this: we made the editor cry because it moved her. So I think that's a win. And this was a professional editor we hired from Red Adept Editing. They're great. If you didn't know, you should check them out if you need an editor. Just tell them Billy Bob sent you.
Billy Bob.
I don't know if that would actually do anything because I don't know if we get referrals, but if you want to mention J.R. Handley and the Blasters and Blades, whatever, it couldn't hurt. Maybe they'll sponsor us. But Red Adept Editing edited for us, and they reached out and let us know that we made the narrator, or excuse me, we made the editor tear up a little bit. But we're here to talk about heroic last stands, or in last stands in general, in both sci-fi and fantasy. So what had you thinking about this topic, Nick, that you wanted it to be something we talked about today?
What I really like about, well, sci-fi and fantasy, we start getting into like epic type stuff, you know, where it's more than one movie, it's more than one book. There's always going to be a last stand, you know, to create tension and drama between the viewer or reader and what's going on screen or on paper, where they're just outmatched. There's like the bad guys outnumber them like 10-1. You know, they're just they don't have enough resources to fight these people off or fight the bad guys off. And then, well, I mean, historically, usually like the good guys win, but then there's times where the good guys don't. You know, they get overrun. They have to escape. And you know, you put up a valiant effort. I mean, like they will write your name down in the halls of Valhalla type stuff, but they still got their asses kicked. They still lost, you know. But on the other time, though, they do a good job of fending. They show their feats of strength and their determination and their willpower to defeat an oversized army that they had no business even fighting. You know, they should have ran, but they didn't. They stood their ground, and they're like, "No more. This is the line. You're not crossing it. We're not running no more." I love it.
This is the iconic the Battle of Thermopylae with the 300 Spartans. Although everyone thinks it was just 300 against the 1,000,000 man, although we think that number is exaggerated just a spent, but the immortals of the Persian army. But they were actually Thebians and forget what other Arcadians. There we go. So there were others that stayed, but what the 300 part came from that lore is when they realized they were about to get overrun, they couldn't hold the line. They sent them home to reinforce the army that would be gathering to face this. So in the end, it was the 300, and even then, it wasn't 300 because some of them had died already.
Right.
And you have the famous Molan lobby from that. Surrender your weapons, come and take them.
Right.
I don't know if when they said, you know, we'll rain arrows and a good will fight in the shade.
They did.
I don't know if that line
that is historically accurate.
Is it? I didn't know if it was from that or the movie.
Oh, well, I mean, the movie got it from the original story, which the comic was based off. A lot of people don't know that 300 was a comic made by Frank Miller.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he wrote it and he did the artwork for it too. He's a legend in the industry. So I'm trying to remember who the Greek writer was that first put down the tale of the Battle of Thermopylae or the Battle of Hell's Gates. but yeah, that's a historically accurate quote. Where
Herodotus, maybe? Was it Herodotus? He
I
wrote
think
down
it
a lot of
was.
stuff.
That does sound familiar. It probably was Herodotus, and yeah, that's an accurate quote. It's like, well, our arrows will um, blot out the sun, and then one of the Spartans was like, well, then I guess we'll fight in the shade.
And then it had the famous plaque that sits. Of course, from my understanding, is where the actual pass at Thermopylae is not in the same place it was, because coastlines shift over the years. But
Right.
the famous plaque at one point in time was something like, "Let all who pass us by know that here, obedient to Sparta's laws, we lie." Basically, it was like we died fighting. The
Yeah,
famous
absolutely.
Spartan quote was, "Come back with your shield or on it," which is just a
Yep.
prehistoric way of saying death before dishonor,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um,
It's pre Benning or pre Fort Moore, I guess, is what they call it now. I'll never call it
it's
Fort
always
Moore.
Fort Benning to me.
That's right. That's right. It's always going to be the Fort Benning School for unruly boys.
Or the John Wayne School for Wayward Boys. I've seen that one too. Although I guess it's
Yep.
boys and girls now, since the ladies are in the infantry. Welcome aboard. Embrace the suck.
Yeah. Here's your ruck.
The Yeah, here's your Alice pack. Although I guess you can call him Steve.
Yeah.
But so one of the things that first let's define a last stand, because they're not all heroic, but a last stand is the idea of the things have gotten so desperate that you have to make a stand for insert reason to the last man. A lot of times it's so others can get away or to buy time for the army to gather. But generally, it's things are so dire that we're going to fight to the death because we need time, or we're losing anyway, right?
Right.
Um, and
It's just like, hey, is this the hill you want to die on? Well, these stories are like, yeah, this is the hill I'm going to die on. For God and country, the gods, my people, whatever reason they want to give, they drew that line in the sand. They're like, yeah, this is where I'm standing. I'm probably going to die, and I'm okay with it.
so it's basically, and I'm stealing this from Wikipedia because they're not always historically accurate. Check their sources, follow the links, but they generally will do a pretty good job at being concise. But a last stand is a military situation in which a body of troops holds a defensive position in the face of overwhelming odds and overwhelming and insurmountable odds. And when they win, even cooler. But most of the time,
Right.
they're heroic last stands because they're going to die. In fact, during the British Empire, a lot of times those heroic last stands, when they were, or the heroic assaults, were called forlorn hopes because
Mhm.
abandon hope, all you who join this party, sort
That's
of
right.
mentality. Now, the next part that we have to discuss, if we want to talk about this, is what makes them so emotional. What makes them resonate with us? Because we didn't know any of those people. It's 100 years. I mean, look, we're talking about the Spartans, and that's at least 2,000 years ago.
Right. I think what makes them resonate with viewers and readers is the buildup beforehand. Any good writer, any good storyteller is going to make you give a damn about these characters. And they'll do it in the shortest amount of time as they possibly can, especially with 300, because you didn't have that much time. It was a movie, it was a comic book. So they really established early on why you should give a damn. Is it the honor? Is it something that you see in those characters, that you feel those values that you think you have, that you see in those characters too? Everybody loves like the action hero. It's like every red-blooded American, likes to think that in those circumstances, in that time, we would do the same thing. Most cases, probably not, but we
I
like
had
seeing
a
ourselves in the hero and the armies
had a
looking
platoon.
on.
I think the one thing the common man can relate to this is because it's just average. They're not superheroes. They're not. I mean, unless it's in fiction, right? But most of the time,
Right.
it's just your average soldier. And that's one of the things that, like, for instance, this isn't really a heroic last stand, but like the charge at Gettysburg, for instance, when Pickett's, well, what's left of his army made it
Pickett's
across
charge.
the field, right, during that charge, like when they're at the fence and they've clearly lost and they're looking around and no one's left, like they could have just killed them, like they were still on the battlefield, but they clasped their hands, gave them a hug. They sent them to horrific prisons afterwards. But I mean, there's a universality, a brotherhood of the warriors. I mean, there's a reason that old army cadence that you and I had during our era is, if I die on a Chinese front, bury me with a Chinese grunt. And it's not because, like, oh, we're pro-communism or we're anti-communist. It's because in the end, we have more in common with the common fighting man than we do with the people that sent us to war.
Absolutely.
Right.
Because
And
we
that's
were
what
there on the
makes
ground.
Right, and that's what makes to me the heroic last stand so moving, is because it's you, it's your brother, your cousin, your uncle, your sister, whatever. Like it could be you.
Yeah.
Um, and um, one of the things that I think makes them stand out is because we want to believe in the angels of our better nature, right? Like that
Yeah.
we would do that. I did have a platoon sergeant before I deployed to Iraq the first time, all these people were talking tough about what they were going to do when we invaded Iraq, because this was before the invasion when we were mobilized. And he's like, all we're going to see are asses and elbows because all you want to be tough guys are going to run. That's my attempt at a Texas accent, by the way. Don't hate me, but the guy was from Texas, so he talked funny.
That was horrible.
Um,
Horrible
it's horrible.
Texas.
I'll do better. Well, there's a reason I don't do voice acting. All right, we'll lay that on the table right now. Don't die. Don't die. You're gonna swallow your dip.
Not
But
today. Not today.
not today, Satan. But yeah, so it's one of those things where, in reality, when crap hits the fan, the average person doesn't always react accordingly. It's one of the things that makes the American military and Western militaries in modern settings so unique, is that we train over and over and over again. And it's like von Steuben told us during the colonial revolution in America. You
Right.
do it to muscle memory so you don't have to think about it in battle.
Yeah, it
Because
becomes a gross motor movement instead of a fine
it's
motor movement.
right. And so the idea is, if you don't have that, though, in most of the heroic last stand stories, they were just your average citizen that were drafted at the last minute. They might have been standing militia in that they met every weekend, but they showing up and playing with your firelock on Greta Green or Lexington Green or whatever, like that's a lot different than doing that in the face of the enemy. You're just
Right.
playing soldier at that point.
But you had the Spartans, we'll go back to 300. The Spartans were a warrior society. They casted out the weak upon infancy. If you looked sickly or deformed, they got rid of you. They were trying to create the superior warrior, and they trained all the time. Their rite of passage to become a man was called the agoge. And they would have to go out there and survive and hunt wolves and like bring back stuff to prove that they did what they did. So you got this society that they're like the Delta Force of ancient Greeks. So when the fit hit the Shan, they would try to make an alliance with Sparta to come help. Because they were a
And
warrior society.
there's value in that. It also has its drawbacks and limitations. If you, what is that expression? If you have a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail.
Sure does.
And so there's some danger in that, but there's value in that too, I think.
I think it's an
But
important role. They and they're also known as being pretty cutthroat politicians, probably figuratively and literally. But
war through other means, that's what politics is.
yeah, or through other
Very
means.
Machiavelli, before Machiavelli was a thing.
Yeah, by like 1,000 years.
Yeah, so the Thermopylae, for instance, was like 480 or 481 BC, which is now BCE. So it used to be before Christ, and now it's before Common Era.
Yeah,
I don't know if the timeline switched or they just added the E at the end.
I think they just added
It's
the
been a
E. I
while.
don't know.
Yeah, I think so. It's been a while since I took ancient history as an undergrad. So when I say it's 480, I'm there's a big ish in there.
Yeah,
Um,
well, going ish. We'll inflect a
um,
higher pitch when we say it. 480
right, right.
ish.
But so one of the things that, as I will say, is the modern military. We did also have our Gobe. I mean, we had to go through our final FTX at Fort Benning and survive on MREs that tried to destroy us from within. So I
Yeah,
mean, that's almost the same thing. Ish.
ish.
All
It's
right.
definitely
So
ish. We're gonna roll with it.
we've we've set up what a last stand is, and we've given some real life examples. So we're going to play the commercial because Bayonetta Books is sponsoring this episode with our On Deadly Grounds stories of desperate last stands from today's top sci-fi authors. We're going to play that commercial, and when we get back, we're going to start citing examples from sci-fi and fantasy. So give us just a minute,
And
and
roll that clip.
and we're going to roll that clip.
Across 1,000 battlefields and 1,000,000 wars, there is always a question. What do you do when all the chips are on the table? Do you run? Try to find salvation in the arms of an easy peace? Or do you stand and fight and send your enemies into whatever hole they crawled out of? On Deadly Ground, a heroic last stand anthology, has 10 stories addressing that question. Each character faces the impossible in different ways, but all will be tested before the day is done. Can they earn a heroic victory amongst the endless eternity of space, or are they doomed to fall into obscurity?
Doomed, I tell you.
Doomed plot twist. They all die. Actually, I don't know that all of them die because that will be a spoiler. But I mean, given the title, I'm just saying.
Give me a second to talk about this cover art here, though. They took a Galaxy-class starship from like Star Trek, and then it's like Star Trek and an X-wing had a baby, and that's that. And it looks awesome. Like it is so damn cool. I'm waiting for someone.
You want to know what I told him?
What?
I told him I wanted Star Trek meets BSG on a run on the Death Star as a joke. And he sent me this. He's like, bet, I got you, Pram. I got you. And I got this. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to be in my bunk. I need a moment.
Yeah, I need a moment. Like, I'll be in my bunk. Definitely pulling a, oh my God, what is his name on?
So it's supposed to be X-Wing. Can you see it?
Yeah, the X-Wing there.
X-Wing,
and then you got the Enterprise / some Battlestar going on up at the helm.
And then you see and then of course you see the Death Star run.
Trench. Yeah,
with the trench run. And it was like, it started as a joke, and I learned with my narrator not to make jokes with him because he takes them very literally, mostly to mess with me. But in this case, like, the results were so amazing. So it's Jamie Glover of Cerulean Designs. He's a British chap. We're supposed to call them chaps, right? That's in Britain.
Chaps, Mike.
Because in Texas, the chaps means something different. I don't know. Different. Chaps are different in Texas.
You wear chaps, and you don't want to wear your mates, or maybe you do.
Well,
I don't know.
We're just gonna move on. It's not that kind of episode. But so the idea is, of course, they resonate because we want to envision ourselves. That's why we read these stories. We want to envision them as ourselves. We want to see good triumph over evil. We get sick of some of the mainstream properties that become so watered down to try to appease everyone that you get pablum and milquetoast nonsense. And so we like to see where the events matter. Like, one of the biggest things that you and I have talked about offline, when we see combat in books and on screen, and then it's like the G.I. Joe ending where they all laugh and, smoke a cigar and they go about like nothing happened. Like, that stuff matters. It changes you forever. And so one of the things, with Heroic Last Stands is people show that this is what really happens. Like, it's not a Sunday stroll.
No, right? It's not.
It changes you forever. And so we try to show some of that.
I would think some of my experiences in combat were more Quentin Tarantino-esque than they were G.I. Joe. It was like something so violent and just so grotesque happened that you go to dark humor and you're just like, think the chow hall is going to be open when we get back? While you're looking inside a dude's cranium because you took it, you surgically took it off with a 50 cal because the 50 cal didn't actually hit him. It just went by him enough where the air pressure just surgically took the top of his dome off, and it's sitting in the back seat and you're just like, you're there. My buddy, we'll just call him Eric. He was eating an apple when we went and checked on the dude. After we came in and cleared it and make sure there was nothing going on, he pulls out an apple from the chow hall out of his pocket. And I was like, oh man, I'm so hungry. Cause we've been out there for like 16 hours. And then I was like, oh, that reminds me. So I took a slug of water and I pulled out some Copenhagen and threw a lip in, and we're staring inside this dude's cranial cavity. Anybody who would saw us doing it, we're like, man, these guys are just certifiably insane. I'm like, no, we just been desensitized.
What doesn't kill you gives you unhealthy coping mechanisms.
Absolutely, like alcohol. And
so, and this will be, I guess, the Army stories we weren't going to do, but like, I remember there was a time I was pulling Overwatch because if you got the roads went black in Iraq, the gun trucks basically became detachable units and assigned to wherever. That because you worked with some of the gun trucks when you were traveling through. If your main unit is stuck because the roads are black, like, they don't say, okay, you get a vacation too there, Mr. Gunner. It's like, we got some work for you, brother. And so we were doing Overwatch, and our platoon sergeant, he came to do it with us because he just wanted to get away from the talk because, staff pogues are staff pogues, right? That's a universal. Yep. And so I remember we were sitting there, and there was this guy in a tricked out like Nissan truck with they had we called them tacticals. I don't know what their official name is. That's just what we call them. Where they mounted like guns and they tried to turn their little Nissan into a tank.
Technicals.
Which technicals. There we go. And so we lit it up because if it's them or me, I'm coming home to have my Starbucks. Which is reminding me, man, I miss green bean. Wow, that's a hell of a
Oh my God, the green bean coffee.
Green bean coffee. So that's what we did after this mission. Like we lit
right
it up
next to an
none
Anthony's
of them,
Pizza.
Yes, and none of them walked away from this. Unfortunately, they got to their wish and they met Allah. And I don't say that with any hate in my heart. Like, it's been a while, so I've moved on. I've made my peace with all that. But
right.
I remember when we got back on base, my platoon sergeant was looking at me and he's like, "Hey, Handley, we're going to the Green Bean and the pizza place." I didn't remember it was called Anthony. I just remember pizza. He's like,
yeah,
after
they had
today,
a
you're not
buffalo
eating
chicken pizza. It was the first time I'd ever seen it, and it would wreck your insides, but it tasted so good.
We did the meat lovers. I don't know why I remember that, but it's like so we got back on base, and like this is the first time where like you shoot at vehicles, the vehicle goes boom, but when everyone's shooting at it, was it you? Was it your friend? You don't know.
No
So you
clue.
just think, okay, it wasn't me. Like, you don't have to process it. This was the time where when I was in the turret, there's no way it was anyone but me reaching out that far with the 50, what the 50 could do, right?
Yeah.
And so there was no question. So I remember I went into the porta potty and I cried like a little girl. And when I went out, I came out of the porta potty and he punched me in the shoulder and he's like, "Man up, you!" And then he used some not so friendly words that we won't say on the podcast. He's like, we're grabbing not the DFAC today. That shit'll kill you." And so we went and he bought the 3 gun trucks that were on my fire team. We all went and he bought us all green bean coffee. Oh my goodness, their espresso chocolate mocha thingy, whatever they called it, because they had weird names for everything.
Yeah.
Like, I don't care how many calories. I'll run extra laps to drink another one of those.
You didn't need to over there.
It was
though.
good.
That was the thing.
No, you sweat it all out, but like
you sweat it all out.
I
was eating
it's memories,
double
man.
bacon
It brings
cheeseburgers
back
every day for lunch.
Yeah, the memories bring back the taste buds too, because now I'm tasting it. But so we sat there, the 9 of us plus him, so there were 10 total, right?
Yeah.
And he's like, just remember, like, the war isn't to die for your country; it's to make the other SOB die for his. Of course, that's a patent from the movie.
Yep.
But
I don't know if
he was old enough that
said that, but
I don't know that he did either. But Old School was old enough that he watched that when it came on the big screen. He should have been retiring at home with his rocker, but Uncle Sugar said, "No, we got one more rodeo for you there, clown."
yeah.
And so it's like one of those things where like that kind of stuff changes you. And so when you see it in the books, and we're going to do another episode about writing realistic combat, but when you see it in the books and they don't take it seriously, it doesn't ring true. One of the things in every time that it's done right, these heroic last stands or last stands in general do, is they make it matter.
Yeah.
Right. It wasn't just insert, extra B 27 died. It's like, no, Jim Bob, he had a brother he left behind. And we talk about who he left behind because most of the time your loved ones back home are why you're doing it. Like I'm holding this pass at Thermopylae because, if they get to Sparta, my wife is there, my kids are there, my whatever, right?
My way of life, my society,
my way
people.
of right. And in many cases, that's exactly what's on the line with these last stands in fiction. So we've talked about the real world ones. We've talked about some of our experiences in combat that sort of gave us that expression. I will tell you, and this before we move on to examples, when I was in Iraq, we were coming out of LSA Anaconda. We've talked about this briefly on the drunken, infamous episode where we talked about Forgotten Ruin because F it, we'll do it live. After we started drinking and the guest was just a few minutes late, a few-ish. We had found that's when you and I found out that we'd actually fought together in Iraq. Because I mean, when you're doing gun trucks, you're talking call signs and like for all like a lot of the call signs overlap. So your eye in the sky is your medevac is always dust off. It doesn't matter where it's coming from, what the helicopter, what it's always dust off, right? Your eye in the sky is always handcuff or sheriff that's relaying to the people on the base. And so like they're just another name most of the time. Like I don't know, you from Adam. I might recognize the call sign we've interacted before if it's another unit, but I don't know who's sitting behind that turret. I don't know any of these people, right? And so we called in, we're coming out of Anaconda out of the West Gate. I think it was the West Gate. I just remember there's a berm on either side and there's a village to our right as we're leaving. And we started taking fire from the village. We're trapped between a Het convoy in front of us, another 915 convoy behind us that the next unit was escorting, and then a Het convoy. So an RPG took out the lead Het. And one of the things people don't realize, those things will turn on a dime because every one of their 18 or 16 axles has an independent like turn.
Yeah.
Every one of their wheelbase has an independent axle, but that means they don't back up. They don't have to. So when you blow the first one and you got the banks, you're trapped. Like it's a perfect textbook ambush. What pisses me off most about that day is I didn't see it coming either. And I should have, because it was so textbook. You get used to them sucking so bad that when they're competent, it kind of catches you by surprise.
Yeah, when you get bad guys that are good at their job, it throws you off.
Especially because we were used to, essentially goat herders with guns, right? That's derogatory. I don't mean it that way, but they were not trained professional warriors, right? Like they were militias, essentially.
Universal fighting plan individuals. That's what we used to call in combatives. Like most people that aren't trained, they call it the universal fight plan. They're just going to come in swinging, trying to throw haymakers and stuff like that. The same with a lot of the insurgents we were fighting.
So whoever this guy leading it was, like, hats off to him. If I see him, I'm going to punch him in the face, but hats off to him. But they took out the lead convoy, so now we can't go forward. They took out, or the lead vehicle, they took out the rear vehicle, so now we can't back up, and we're just stuck.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we were trapped, and I couldn't go anywhere because while my Humvees were maneuverable, my job was to protect the civilians in the convoy. Right. And I'll tell you offline the funny story that happened that day. Let's just say a guy was figured his last day on Earth, he might as well have one last time with his own company, shall we say, in the middle of the firefight. And I'm just like, I mean, I can't even hate you, bro.
Combat Jack.
I guess I told you now. What's the point of telling you after? But anyway,
Combat Jack.
We started trading fire with them, and we just couldn't dislodge them from this vehicle. These buildings. They had just like reinforced it so well that even the 50 wasn't cutting through. I never did go and investigate. The base security ended up going manually and clearing it after the convoys had gotten out. So we called in helicopters, like we were calling in air support. And now keep in mind, tracers go in both directions. The green convoys that clearly are Army shooting, they're getting shot at. The helicopters were so afraid of being charged with murder that they said, "Oh, we can't positively identify the target. We do not have PID," and they bounced. They left us hanging. So the only thing we had that was making any difference was my rifle, because I was a squad designated marksman. I got to play with toys a little bit nicer than some, not quite as cool as the Rangers got to use. We were like, if Rangers were the professional league, I was like the T-ball team.
Oh God!
If you look at like it's the basic leg grunt, right?
That's one way to put it. Yeah, I wouldn't put it that way. I mean, at least
self-deprecating humor. It's just what I bring to the table. But so, I'm trying to even the odds as much as I can, because you got to figure every fifth vehicle is Army, which means 4 out of every 5 are civilians with no weapons, right?
Right.
So you're just trying to whittle it down as much as you can. And I remember when the helicopters left, I looked at, because I was in the turret that day, I looked at the guy that was sitting in my TC seat, my truck commander seat. I'm like, this might be it, bro. Like, this is going to be the end. And so when we called the Reaper, which was the Ranger sniper element that was nearby, I don't think you guys were out of Anaconda, but you just were in the area. Like, basically, I remember, and the guy, we won't say his name because OPSEC and stuff, but I'd like to buy them a beer. I remember he told me I was an idiot because I was exposing myself on purpose, trying to draw fire away from the civilians. I really thought that was going to be the end. Like, that was it. And then you guys came. So it's one of those things where, like, when you see yourself in the moment and you think, oh my God, this is the end, you can appreciate why people run. And like, I don't judge them as harshly as I did before the war, because man, I was tempted. Like, it was only weaponized stubbornness that kept me there and not running like other people had in the past, right? Like,
well, that's the training. That's the best way to put it. Weaponized stubbornness. The grunts that come out of John Wayne School for Wayward Boys, we're dumb as hell, but it's trained into us. So it's like, stand your ground. And what you're given is a perfect example of a last stand. And
it came out good for us. The good guys win because your sniper was really, really good.
Yeah, he was.
As long as I was bait. Right, he's still alive. I talked to him. You made that introduction, and I really appreciate it. I owe that man a bottle of something. But we did, I stayed in the position because I vacated the turret to get my, SDM rifle out. And when I was doing that, like, I remember he told me I was a moron for exposing myself, but he was laughing when he said it, which was weird because, we're in the middle of a firefight. Who the hell laughs then? Because I wasn't laughing. I can tell you that. But it's one of those things where you can appreciate that. And I will say that I don't know who said it, but it was MacArthur line about, give me the West Point football players because they'll take the hit. Like there's something to be said for that contact sport mentality. I played rugby in college, and I remember like I would try to shy away from the hit in the beginning or pass the pitch to somebody else on the pitch, and my coach was like, I got you, bro. And so he's like, after that, the rule was Handley had to, if he got the ball, he couldn't pass it. I just had to go for it and take the hit every single time, to the point where like I started getting a reputation for getting blood on people's uniforms, either mine or theirs, because I wouldn't pass. I take the hit. I think that kind of mentality that the infantry beats into you is what makes us be able to do that.
Yeah.
I think when it's done well in fiction, you see some of that too. So you had some examples when we were talking the other night when we were setting this up of those kinds of last stand moments, whether we win or lose, because sometimes it's cool for the last stand to win. You got to be careful because every battle can't be Thermopylae, right? Sometimes it just ends, right? That's just where the fat lady sings for you. But what are some good examples in fiction?
The Battle of Helm's Deep, Lord of the Rings.
Okay, what makes that one special to you or stick out?
Well, they just got their he wasn't exactly a king. I guess he was a king. Yeah. Can't remember his name. But y'all know who he is. He was under the spell of Saruman. He finally breaks it. The orcs and all the bad guys are coming, and they outnumber their forces probably like 100 to 1, and they're just surrounding the castle. They're surrounding Helm's Deep, and they rangered up on that one, but they all had it in their head that they were going to die, but they were going to take a lot of them with them, And they put out the call to Gondor, and Gondor didn't answer, and it just so it really fell down to that one little line during Benghazi with the operators that were there. They're like, we're on our own, no one's coming to save us.
Yeah. And that's the Lord of the Rings gives you another perfect example when they're going through the dwarven caves and they meet the baddies, and I think it was the dragon was there too, if I'm correct. And you had
what's his name, the Botharog.
Yeah. When they had that scene and they're on the bridge and the wizard is like, go, I've got this, and he holds the rearguard action. I mean, it's a rearguard action of 1. It's a last stand of 1, but that's a perfect example. It's like, I might not make it, but I've got to let these guys, I've got to give them time to do the mission, whatever the mission is, right?
Nothing says that the last stand has to be a formidable outnumbering force against, a smaller force. Gandalf and the Balrog, that's a perfect example of a last stand. I think he was farming XP, to be honest with you, because he comes back as the White Wizard, So I kind of think Gandalf's a dick. He was farming XP. He didn't want to share the XP. He was out there trying to be a tank, and getting the aggro, for you gamers out there.
All right. One of the things that
perfect example.
One of the things that makes it so believable with Tolkien and Lord of the Rings is he lived that life. Like, right, he was at the Somme in World War I. I think it's like in one day, like 40 to 50,000 people died in the first hour. It was atrocious. That's where we had the great meeting of man versus machine, and we realized, holy crap, the way we've been fighting for the last 1,000 years doesn't work against a machine gun, right?
Or a tank. That's where tanks were introduced into combat.
Well, the tank was introduced to counter the machine gun.
Right.
And so it was one of those to cross no man's land and get over the traps and stuff.
Yep.
But one of the things that taught us, though, was, one of the things that taught him was exactly how powerful those moments can be. Because every step across the open land in the Somme was like your own last stand against your own fear and your inner cowardice, right? Like,
absolutely.
Yeah, you're strolling around. Like if there's there's a few movies about World War I that get it right, where they're strolling across, like they're on parade, shoulder to shoulder, good order and discipline, and then holy crap, it gets real. If you want to see what that looks like with that realization, have you seen the movie The Field of Lost Shoes?
I have not.
It is
I'll put it on
about the Civil War. It's about the Battle of Newmarket. The VMI cadets were marching to fill the line because they were short on troops, and they ended up marching overnight to reach Newmarket, which is a several mile trip. And they did it, a lot of them were kids. So like one of your steps is two of theirs, right? And then they get there and orders were confused. And long story short, when they were supposed to charge ahead just to get to the next cover, they marched in parade ground precision, flags flying, drums beating. And every time someone dropped, they just closed rank and kept going. And then they get to that fence line where they heroically, depending on your perspective, where they charge the cannons and take them. They're like, holy crap, this just got real. And I think that's what these heroic last stands are, is that moment where people realize, holy crap, this just got real. So other than Helm's Deep and other than the Dwarven ruins in Lord of the Rings, I don't think that actually got a name for that scene, which is something else to consider. They don't always get names. Sometimes it's just, BFG nowhere in a one little field in the middle of whatever, right? Like, and it doesn't even get the benefit of a name.
Right.
It's just grid coordinate 12B or whatever.
Yeah. Some sort of lat long,
Or like in Vietnam, it was like Hill 365 or whatever.
Right.
I think that was Hamburger Hill, right?
Hamburger Hill.
And that was just a designation we gave it. Like that wasn't the name of the mountain. It was just, on their maps that they put together, they gave it a name.
Right.
Or a number, excuse me. And so like, it's one of those things where that sometimes giving it a name gives it power that we remember, but there's, for every one that we remember, there's 100 little ones that never, it was just some guy dying for his buddies. So what other examples? So we gave fantasy ones. Do you have any that were like sci-fi?
Oh yeah. Aliens. Perfect example. LV-426.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I mean there's a lot of last stand moments going on there before they went back to the ship. I think that there's a couple of them in there actually, where they start, and it's in the extended cut, the director's cut. And I don't know why they cut that scene because it was so badass. But they set up these sentry guns, these auto turrets, and that the xenomorphs, they got into this access tunnel that was going to go into, like, I think it was like the med bay where they were all at, and they kept probing the guns. So they were sending a massive amount of aliens or xenomorphs towards them, and the guns are just just sounds like they're just sawing down a tree, and they're just tearing them up, and the xenomorphs just kept coming until eventually they ran out of ammo. And then so now the humans are like, oh shit, they're out of gun. Our guns are in op. They're out of ammo, and then we can't go in there and rearm them because you got the Mongol horde or the xenomorph horde coming in. So they start positioning themselves, and they just dwindle down. It was like a war of attrition until you start getting down to like Ripley and Hicks.
Wasn't there? I want to say it was either one of the ones where they were all in like the forklift and they added guns to them and they were like trying to hold their own. Was that? Am I thinking Avatar, like the blue people, not the Airbender?
Yeah, that was Avatar. Where they started.
I don't remember
weaponry to things that didn't have weapons before.
Yeah, and so like that was a good example because they thought it was the end and like this was it, but we're gonna go down swinging. Here's another good example. I think it was Bobby, the guy with the Native American vibe going on in the Predator when he went mano a mano.
Billy. Yeah,
Billy. There we go. Like that's a good example. Like it was a last stand, but it was man versus alien, but man, right? Like the odds were not because there's numeric odds. The odds were because he had technical and tactical superiority with his Predator suit, right, and his natural. Because I don't know that it was ever clear how much of that was suit and how much of that was just biology for the alien, for the Predator.
The thing, with the Predator culture, they're hunters, so they're raised in a culture where cover, concealment, camouflage. You know, obviously their technology advanced and they're able to go do active camouflage. You know, where they're practically invisible. But yeah, I mean, you're talking about a culture that's just raised to hunt things, and they don't care what, as long as it's a formidable adversary or something worth hunting, which human beings usually are in those types of stories. That's what happened. And Billy's just like, all right, cool, man. Makes a big cut on his chest, drops all his gear, and it's just him and a machete and his Native American just balls. He's like, I'm going to face this thing and let my boys get away.
There was, if you look on some of the sites that list the, the 10 most whatever, everyone likes to make the listicle sites where like the most heroic whatever. I was surprised at the number of last stands that were in anime and manga versus like traditional Western writing. But like, I guess Cowboy Bebop had like 4 of them that made several of these lists. League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. It was, I'm trying to remember, Mr. Hyde, something about took on the Martian invasion to buy time.
Yeah,
I haven't actually read that series, so I don't know. I'm just remembering the article I read.
Story. Oh my God, you're missing out. It's so good. He took all these historical literary characters and made a super team out of them.
Okay.
So you had Dorian Gray, you had Dracula. Well, in the series, you had Dracula. They gender swapped it for like a Bride of Dracula, and then you had Alan Quatermain, and you had Tom Sawyer, who was a U.S. Marshal. And then you had Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. You had Captain Nemo. I mean, it was just like you took all these like fictional, historically just awesome characters, all these protagonists, and put them in a super team.
So there's another one that I actually caught because of my son likes the superheroes. It was Superman the Animated Series, and it was like Dan Turbin basically told Darkseid, I can't remember.
Darkseid,
basically Darkseid, get off my planet. I thought that was. I mean, again, it was one-on-one because heroic last stands and last stands in general don't have to be large-scale armies versus smaller armies or military units. They can be, and often are in sci-fi, just because you get the smaller scope to make the feeling impact. Like you narrow the scope to exponentially increase the emotional results for the reader,
right,
or the viewer. And so you often see these smaller number scale fights, right? Like if it's just a mass of troops, like if you look at the Alamo, if you didn't know who some of those names were, like it wouldn't have the emotional impact because you narrowed the focus. And so sometimes you see in fiction, a lot of these last stands are more narrow. So it's like, You Shall Not Pass. That's the name of the scene with Gandalf and the Balrog that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
That's
You shall not pass, and he slams his staff down,
and so like those moments happen because we narrow the focus to the smaller level so you can relate to it, right? Like if you're just watching, one little blurb in a sea of extras, like if you've watched Braveheart, we won't get into the historical accuracy, but if you watch Braveheart and you want to root for William Wallace because Longshanks was a jerk, and you're watching that, like insert blue-faced guy with a kilt over here, like I don't care necessarily that he died because I didn't know who he was. He was just another faceless mass of humans, right? Or in sci-fi, fantasy, alien, mythical creature, whatever. But by narrowing it, to these individual characters, we care more. So you tend to see smaller scale last stands, I think. There was some that were The Last Castle from Fables, which is the comic book. My son read that one, so I know that comic had a pretty good one. Good. Yeah, there were a bunch of last stands in George R. R. Martin's A Storm of Shadows. The blacksmith, the one-armed blacksmith takes on the giant.
Yeah.
But so we've gotten a lot of examples. We've talked about what it is. Do you guys, dear listener, have a favorite last stand? I mean, for Nick and I, we're history nerds. I mean, you're not going to beat Thermopylae. That's one that's drilled into the soul of every modern warrior.
Absolutely.
Like Mola Lobby has taken on a life of its own. Come and take it. It was exemplified. You know what? Modern example: Battle of the Bulge.
Battle of the Bulge.
Battle of the Bulge with that historic response to the German to surrender, and he says nuts.
Yep.
Right, like those they just the audacity, the sheer audacity is what makes them stick in our minds.
Guys with more balls than brains is what my platoon sergeant used to tell me.
Yep, and there's a famous line. If you've seen the movie, the modern movie, and we're wrapping it up, I promise. We're trying to keep the time, people. But that the movie Pearl Harbor, and they're getting ready to get these pilots that survived the bombing of Pearl Harbor to go on the Tokyo's Doolittle Raiders.
The Doolittle Run, yeah.
The Doolittle Run, and they said, you're going to be heroes. And the line was, I know what heroes are. They're people who get medals they don't live to see, or something to that effect.
Yeah, that's pretty. It's close enough.
Yeah, I mean, they were more eloquent because they remembered what was in the script, and I don't. But yeah, so that's kind of what makes them stand out. So, Nick, do you have a favorite other than what we've talked about?
Actually, and people will probably disagree, but I would say Man of Steel, Superman versus Zod.
Okay. Okay.
That was a good last stand.
Yeah, I could see that.
Because Zod was willing to destroy everything. And all Superman wanted to do, all Kal-El wanted to do was stop him. And he ended up having to break like a cardinal rule of being a superhero. He ended up having to kill him,
Other than the history nerd stuff, like I liked the one I wrote for On Deadly Ground because I'm biased. It was called A Mother's Love, and it's about a female pilot who was a fighter pilot, and the enemy horde was attacking, and so they basically took the fighters out to hold time for the civilians to get away from this planet that was about to be conquered, right? Because they didn't want to leave their families behind to evacuate. I liked the story of the Tin Man in the Galaxy's Edge universe. It was about Order of the Centurion in the Galaxy's Edge universe. It was a heroic last stand on Sidon with Wash and crew. They ended up living, some of them, but it was just a few Space Marines versus the world, right? And in the end, some of them came home to tell the tale of their fallen friends. I thought that was a pretty good one. I can't think of anything else as iconic that's jumping out to me. So with that, dear listener, do you have a favorite last stand in fantasy or a last stand in sci-fi? Tell us about it, what you think. I'm hesitant to list the examples that a lot of the lists had from George R. R. Martin, mostly because I don't want to start a series that I know will never get an ending. Like that would just crush my soul to not know. So I can't use that example for you, dear listener. But give us your favorites. And with that being said, Nick, before I let you go, where can listeners and viewers who enjoyed our little, and somehow we still told Army stories. Man, now I know why we have guests. We stopped that.
Yeah.
But how can listeners and viewers find you if they want to support your art?
Oh, you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Nick Garber Art. You can find me and message me on my company's website, apogeecomics.com. You can find me on Facebook. Just type in Nick Garber Art. You'll see a very pretty picture that I drew of Stan Lee, and that's how you know you're in the right spot. And that's it. That's how you find me.
Okay. And you can find me as everywhere that's anywhere worth being as J.R. Handley, because there aren't that many of me. I don't think there are any others. If they are, they're pretenders to the throne. And as usual, all of Nick's and I's links, all of them are tied to the YouTube page because you can tie the links together. So our personal stuff, if you just go to the Blasters and Blades YouTube page, you can find us. You can find us, speaking of the podcast, you can find us on Twitter at twitter.com/SF_fantasy_show, Sierra Foxtrot _fantasy_show. You can email us at blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. Again, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. That's the easiest way to reach us because I answer that. We have a Facebook group where all the shenanigans happen over at facebook.com/groups/Blasters and Blades Podcast. Again, /groups/Blasters and Blades Podcast. You can find our website over at anchor.fm/blasters-and-blades. Again, anchor.fm/blasters-and blades, where you can support the show for as little as 99 cents a month. You can help keep the lights on, or you can support the show more directly over coffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section that's for the podcast. Or if you want to support one of Nick's pages or one of my edits, you can throw that in there too. Whatever you want to do, but we appreciate your support. But sure, if you put it in the pod for the podcast, wow, this is why we do the live reads and we don't pre-record this, because messing up makes it almost as much fun as if we just did a boring static clean read. But you put in there that's for the podcast, and I promise I will keep my co-hosts Nick Garber and Doc Cisca duly caffeinated. They will drink until their liver explodes.
Yes.
Your mama didn't raise no quitter. That's what they say, right?
Mama didn't raise no quitter. Well, I mean, she said it anyway, but we're an all ages show.
Absolutely, all ages. Well, I don't know with some of the stories we told, but thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For Nick Garber and Doc Cisca, I am Jared Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blades podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time, where we'll indulge our love of all things nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and everything that goes boom. And we will try to keep the gory army stories to a minimum. But let's face it, some of you come because you like to be tortured with those things. So our demons become your demons, and don't send us the bill for the therapy because it's not cheap. With that being said, thanks for coming around again, Nick. I'm glad we did this, and we'll have to put together one for writing realistic combat in sci-fi and fantasy. And since the mediums are different, because I think it could be more visceral in fantasy, I think we split those into 2 episodes. So you and I should get together offline and put together a list of potential guests for those episodes with the credentials, with the stabbies and the pew-pews.
And the pew-pews.
All right. I will let you go, sir. I expect 12 more pages drawn before you go to bed. Can you do it?
Yes, sir. They're not going to be good pages, but I'll get them done.
Stick figures count. With that, we appreciate your time, dear listeners.